is that darn Cardi Jew? They're making us Rabbinics look horrible.
If you've enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.
Shalom. This is Hakam Yar ben-Emmett again with the Torah Watchman Show International, LLC, non-for-profit 501c3 U.S. registered company. I hope everyone's been well. I want to first apologize for not posting a video for a while. Been very, very busy with my employment, my government work and everything else, and feeling tired, of course, with the time change, season changes, and Jewish holidays and everything else, and chasing my 9-year-old daughter around the house and running errands and all this. It just completely occupied, but you know, our God has been reaching out to me. He wants me to do another video for you. I hope everyone's well. The title of this topic of interest series video, where did Hebrew come from? And this is a topic I would say is not scandalous or anything else, but many people have many different opinions about the subject, and a lot of them are not quite right. Biblical Hebrew is one of the Canaanite tongues. Believe it or not, yes, it owes its ancient origins all the way back to the land of Canaan. Think about Abraham and Sarai when they came from Mesopotamia to dwell in the land of the Canaanites. And this was about 4,000 years ago, which in turn is part of the larger Semitic language family. This is something I didn't really think about until I researched this information. Yes, not every single Canaanite tribal entity, say going back 4,000 years, even further, very old races of people that Abraham encountered along Sodom and Gomorrah. You know all the stories there. But a large percentage of them did come ultimately from the son of Noah, yes, Shem. So Semites, actually the operative word that's used to refer to the large diverse group of individuals and races or tribes of people from that son, and I'll show you the pedigree very soon. The Semitic tongue per se, which is Hebrew or Hebrew-like, owes its origins all the way up to the son of Noah, which is Shem. Now, the Hebrew Bible or Tanakh, also sometimes called the Old Testament by non-Jews like Christians, was written almost entirely in Hebrew, other than several chapters in the book of Daniel. But other than that, that's a small percentage compared to the large amount of passages and sidras and things of this nature that's written in the biblical Hebrew. Essentially means non-Masoretic text, just straight consonants. Scholars use the term biblical Hebrew to describe the language of the Bible to distinguish it from other forms of Hebrew, like in contemporary times, such as Rabbinic Hebrew, which, as you know, if you are familiar, you have been to an Ashkenazi shul, and you hear the rabbi or cantor pray the Shakri's prayer, you hear that the pronunciation of the Hebrew is a lot different than if you went to a Sephardi shul or synagogue, okay? Where you have a strong emphasis on O instead of Ah, like in the Sephardi context, the way they speak in their tradition. And of course, if you read an Israeli newspaper, it's going to be all consonants and no Masoretic text needed. Why? It's because most Jews in Israel don't need the Masoretic text because they hear their neighbors, at least say since 1948 at least, since we became a country again, they hear their neighbors over generations speaking Hebrew outside of the synagogue. You have religious Hebrew in the synagogue, and then you have more secular and contemporary Hebrew outside, like in Tel Aviv, at a sporting event, or you watch a news station, or watch a movie or something. That is the contemporary Hebrew where you use a much larger lexicon for technical vocabulary, like Hebrew words for airplane, or our favorite, chocolate, which is chocolate in Hebrew. There are many examples, not germane. The oldest existing Hebrew Bible in a codex format is debated, and how you define oldest, depending on whether one requires it to be a complete list or partial list. Now, there are two primary candidates I'm going to get into briefly. Everyone's heard of the Leningrad Codex, probably. More renowned, per se, more popular, like what the Art Scroll is based on. But a much older form is known as the Aleppo Codex. Aleppo, of course, is a city in Syria, and there was a very large, very old synagogue there around 920 CE. This is widely considered the oldest and most authoritative Hebrew Bible codex. Why? Because the very named greats, like Maimonides and many other of our rabbis of blessed memory, they actually went there to that synagogue. They had like a library of sacred books, and one of those, none other, was the Aleppo Codex. This was a Hebrew Bible, the first of its kind. Okay, and I want to point out, because the original author that I did this video from, the transcript, did not point this out. I don't know why. It was considered the most accurate because it incorporated Masoretic text. That's the vowel symbols and pointers and strokes and other things of that nature, the rise and fall of your voice. So when you read Hebrew, and many people sing as they pray in a prayerfully way when they read Hebrew in that context. When you have the Masoretic text, it's easier to understand. Of course, that's based on oral tradition, not the one that Orthodox talks about, but the oral tradition in hearing people speaking Hebrew and writing down Hebrew for hundreds of years, going back to, let's say, 2,500 years ago. Let's say that. It was completed by an individual, lone name here, Aaron ben Moshe ben Asher. Okay? He was a Canaanite Jewish scribe. Very, very popular in his time. And again, this is around 920 Common Era. He was the first to incorporate the use of Masoretic text, as I said before, within the Hebrew Bible. That's why so many people wanted to go there and read it and investigate it and maybe copy out passages and things of that nature for their own study notes. Okay? For instance, how do you know how to reverently and accurately to pronounce the sacred name of God? Well, if you have the use of Masoretic text, and you know that Masoretic text goes back to Qumran caves and things like that, Dead Sea Scrolls and all this, and they have the same diction there, the same use of strokes and Masoretic text there, you know more or less it's going to be accurate. For instance, today, we don't even use the Hebrew alphabet letter for W, like a Wav. We use Vav instead of Wav. and that's not germane to get into that, but one of those two letters is the right letter for the proper sounding and pronunciation of the holy name of God. Okay? Now, however, it was severely damaged in a fire in 1947. What happened? There was an Islamic terrorist attack against that synagogue, and it was nearly burned to the ground. This codex actually survived the fire, and it's debatable how much of it survived, what percentage of its pages were destroyed, because people say today that more than 2/5 of its pages are missing. Largely, the most significant was the 5 books of the Torah. I did a video on this. You can check it later on. Just look up the name of Aleppo Codex and the Torah Watchman Show. Just search that on YouTube. You'll find it. And I will put it in the description of this video for easy finding. But anyway, it's rumored that criminals in Jerusalem, when it was transported from when Aleppo, when the synagogue was destroyed or severely damaged, and the Islamic fascists took over in that area, when the Aleppo Codex version Bible was taken to Jerusalem, it was stolen again, and pages were literally ripped out, torn out. And I put this in my video, and you don't quote me on this, but I've read this, and other people said this, that rabbinics were very angry or upset or anxious or nervous or whatever, that actually the Noahides were the first to establish this lexicon of truth and accuracy. I mean, it was the very best and one of a kind, the very first ever full, complete Hebrew Bible that was making use of Masoret text. And interesting that the 5 books of the Torah were touched more than any other of the books, like the Nevi'im and the prophets and sacred writings, is because I think the sacred name of God was mentioned in those 5 books, so predominantly. And I think that caused a lot of disruption, I don't know, scandal, whatever. Later on, they found other pages that were sold at auctions, expos and things like this, and people used them as bookmarks, and they actually retrieved a lot of those pages and put them in a lockbox, essentially in Jerusalem, where the Aleppo Codex is stored to this day. Another codex, and I have not heard of this one, is Sassoon, is from the 9th and 10th century Common Era. So a little bit newer than the Aleppo. Recently verified as dating to a similar period as Aleppo Codex, the Codex Sassoon is significantly more complete, missing only about 12 pages of text. Because of near completeness, it currently stands as the earliest, most complete Hebrew Bible in existence. Unlike Muslims, who believe that if it's a newer commentary of the Qumran, they believe the newer commentaries over a period of time are the most accurate instead of the oldest. Well, according to most archaeologists and people that study ancient languages and literature and things like that, the oldest manuscript is considered the most accurate because over a period of time, people forget, and when they copy things before we had modern printing press, you can make mistakes. And it loses its accuracy, and then you have personal biases by certain nefarious scribes, and so on, etc., etc. So I hope you know what I'm saying. Now, the next codex, again, is the Leningrad Codex, and the date of this one is 1008 Common Era. Okay, prior to the public exhibition and re-verification of the Codex Sassoon completeness, the Leningrad Codex was generally considered the oldest and complete manuscript of the Hebrew Bible, and Leningrad is none other than St. Petersburg of Russia. Okay, and Leningrad, of course, is referred to that because that's back in the time of the USSR, the Soviet Union. Okay, so the Leningrad is pretty much 100% complete. It's based on a lot of research and analysis from the other codexes. and it's used as a master lexicon for all the other Hebrew Bibles and sacred books that we have to this day. Just think about of your Chumash, your Oscar Chumash, JPS, other publishing Hebrew publishing agencies out there. It's all based on something. If you look in the beginning of the introduction, it probably tells you what codex it's based on. That's very interesting, I think. Now, I have a graphic behind me here that shows the actual pedigree of the manuscript, per se, of the different codex, so you can see what I'm talking about. Now, where did the Hebrew language come from? The location, origin, place, event. Hebrew is part of a family of languages called the Semitic tongues or languages. The name Semitic is coined by a German linguist, in the late 18th century. So before the 18th century, they didn't use that term, Semitic. Derives from Shem, called Sem in Greek and Latin. So you don't want to know how it went from Shem, like in Hebrew, to Sem, which became a prefix for Semite, is the introduction of the Greek and Latin tongue and all those writings. The son of Noah, from whom the Hebrews, Arameans, and Arabs are said to have descended from languages within a single family derived from a common ancestral tongue. I think this is very interesting. But only in rare cases is this ancestor language known. So, an example, all of the Romance languages, and most people know this, Spanish, French, Italian, etc., is based on Latin. That's the Roman language that was popularized and used so much during the time of the Roman Empire and their expansion. But the ancestor of the Germanic languages, English, German, Dutch, etc., was never written down, and so it can only be partially reconstructed by linguists. So you don't have one that has a master template like Latin, then you have more of the Germanic languages. I actually have a old, Siddur, and it's written in German, but the language is not the German that people speak today. It's a different form, it's much older, and it's harder to read. Just like Anglo-Saxon English is older and more difficult to read compared to modern English. About the same thing. So, likewise, the language is unknown, the master template. We can safely say that the language, which the scholars would call it Proto-Semitic, had begun to evolve into a separate descendant language already before 3000 BCE. So we're talking about the Latin root, then you have another root, English, German, and Dutch, which is based on something other than Latin. And we don't have a complete data source or alpha source for that. But scholars refer to all things Semitic as Proto-Semitic, something that comes before. And that date goes all the way back to get this, 3000 before Common Era. Besides Hebrew, the Semitic language family includes many languages that are still spoken today, including Amharic, the national language of Ethiopia. The first time I knew that. And there's another language known as Tigrinya, the natural language of Eritrea. And then Maltese, Malta, the language of Malta. And also another one by the name of Socotra, the spoken in the island of Socotra in the Indian Ocean. You're talking about Indonesia and that area. And various dialects of Aramaic spoken in small numbers in Syria, in Iraq, and Iran, and Turkey today. And this referred to almost a dead or extinct language. And most notably Arabic, which has well over 200 million speakers. So I guess that's the most popular language at all. and it owes its root to the Semitic tongue, the son of Noah, Shem, or Sem. The Semitic family also includes a number of languages that were spoken in biblical time, but have since become extinct. One example is the famous Akkadian language, the language of the ancient Babylonians and Assyrians who dominated the Near East for centuries. Of course, Jews were notably exiled into these countries, in these regions. Akkadian is actually the oldest attested Semitic language of all time. First written down around 2500 BCE, before Common Era, and we know this not by papyrus, because that rots, much sooner than that, probably on pottery, or steels, or some rock, or something like that that's more permanent. Though the biblical text may have been composed a couple centuries earlier, we still in the process of, archaeologists and linguists are still in the process of museums and different places in the world still deciphering this as I make this video. Akkadian became extinct probably around 100 CE. So again, Akkadian is the oldest Semitic tongue and language put to use. Older than any others, but of course it's extinct today and no one uses it. Some other extinct languages are known as the Sabayak, the Ugatric, and the Gaez. Sabayak was the language of the ancient kingdom of Shaba, and I've not heard of this before, which was based in what is today the country of Yemen. And the last of the Jews in Yemen before they became all Islamic fascist terrorists, they allied to Israel by permission of the Israeli government. And it's known as B'nai Israel, or the sons of Israel. Okay, we have a new section I'm moving into. I like to break this up. That language ceased to exist sometime after the Arab conquest of the 7th century CE. Ugaritic was a language of the city of Ugat, located in the Syrian coast, in the northwest of the country. Ugaritic texts are known only from a very short period of history, between roughly 1400 and 1200 BCE. Gaez was the primary written language of Ethiopia from the 1st to the 19th centuries of CE, and it remains in use as the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Christian Church. All Semitic tongues are related to one another, but some are more closely related than others. As such, the family can be divided in different branches and sub-branches. For example, the Akkadian split off from the rest of the family quite early and is the only distantly related to Hebrew. So again, the most ancient forms of Hebrew is probably the less recognizable today by current linguist specialists, scientists. There are a dozen or two Semitic languages spoken in Ethiopia, and all of these from a branch of the family known as Ethiopian Semitic. To continue the family metaphor, per se, the languages in the Ethiopian branch could be considered siblings, okay? And again, like an ancestral pedigree. While Hebrew might be considered a cousin. Consider the graphic here that I'll show you in a moment that shows the entire pedigree of modern Hebrew at the bottom, going all the way up to the most ancient forms, like the Akkadian, going up to Shem. Where does Hebrew fit in the Semitic language family? Hebrew is part of the sub-branch of the Semitic family known as Canaanite, from my introduction. This might seem strange, since the Bible tells us that Hebrews and Canaanites were normally enemies, but they spoke pretty much the same language. And I promise you, Abraham and Sarah, even though they probably spoke Akkadian per se, when they came down in Canaan, and these had tribal merchants and traders and things like that going throughout the world of the Levant at that time, they picked up the language. And Abraham, Sarai, and And Lot and the others, they probably spoke Canaanite. And that was a precursor for the language of Hebrew, the subject of this video. So, neighboring nations, they picked up the language readily. Canaanite was similar to Latin as far as a master template root language for many others. Besides Hebrew, the languages included Phoenician, Moabite, Ammonite, and Edomite. And incidentally, when the Hebrews were slaves in Goshen, Egypt all this time, these other nations I just mentioned probably had slaves of their peoples as well, and they all intermingled in the workforce, in the Egyptian workforce, and they spoke a common tongue and common language. And again, they were immersed with the Egyptian tongue as well. I want to point out that the story of Moshe is very interesting. His name was actually Moses, was Egyptian, which means to draw from the river. And there's actually a river hieroglyphic sign of that word for Moses. In Hebrew, it is Moshe. So you see there, from our own Torah, the borrowing and use of the Hebrew tongue incorporated into the Hebrew lexicon. Only Hebrew and Phoenician are well tested. There's a lot of Phoenician root buried within the Hebrew language today. And we know this by looking at various examples of pottery, primarily pottery, shards and things of this nature going back thousands of years. Now, throughout all the numbers of text, the more data samples you have, the more complete and more accurate the final conclusion can be, other than an educated guess or hypothesis. So the more text inscriptions we have to decipher, which may be just bits and pieces here and there, and probably observed by linguists and archaeologists and other specialists in those fields throughout the world, you don't see the final results until they reveal the secrets, what they discover, into a conference or something like that, or some peer-reviewed paper or study, and they release it. And we're the last ones to know about that. So as I make this video, there may be other discoveries that will be groundbreaking in the very near future, I hope. In sum, Hebrew is a part of a group of closely related languages known as Canaanite. The Canaanite languages are in turn a sub-branch of a larger family known as Semitic, whose members are vice versa spoken throughout the Middle East even to this day, North Africa and the Horn of Africa. Having been in continuous written use for roughly 3,000 years, Hebrew is one of the longest attested languages in human history that survived the times. And for a while in the Middle Ages before that, rabbis and other people were afraid that Hebrew was a dying language, that it wasn't for the Canaanite gift of Masoretic texts. It wouldn't have been normalized, and it wouldn't have not propagated to many other Jews and Arab-speaking people as well, because there was a blend of Arab and Hebrew dialect and diction. So if you read Arabic and you have introduction of Masoretic texts, Caracs actually were responsible for teaching certain groups of Muslims in the ancient world the Torah. And the signs and clues there were Masoretic symbols were inserted in various letters of the Arabic language. And if you read an Arabic book or something like that, or maybe a sacred writing, in order to pronounce it in the Hebrew tongue, you can insert those Masoretic texts. So if you wanted to give the book of Exodus to an Arabic friend or Muslim, you could actually transcribe that into a tongue that will teach them the Masoretic text as well, because in Arabic, for instance, the letter P, as in Palestine, does not exist. So how do you make that P sound? Well, you have the use of special tips tooltips per se from Hebrew to guide the Arabic speaker to speak the word correctly and to understand what it means. As the original language of the Bible and still the main language of Jewish worship and prayer, it remains an important language to study. There's still much we can learn today. The benefit of Masoretic text cannot be overstated enough. It's often understated by some people in the rabbinical community, and they take great pride in utilizing it, but they don't give any credit to their Noahide brothers as well for actually finding and discovering and incorporating it in the Aleppo Codex. Now, as it thrives today as a spoken language of approximately 9 million or so speakers in the state of Israel, Hebrew is the national language of Israel. And believe it or not, in the 21st century, English is still not the standard language or national language in America, and I hope that changes very soon. Now, I would not be honest if I didn't give credit where credit's due. I want to thank so much PhD scientist R&D Rubin. In 2004, he published a study that I just did a video again, Harvard University, and I want to give him all the credit for his deep diving and research and putting this together. I also went to other sources. I use artificial intelligence to quickly to spin and spawn results from multiple sources as well to be able to add and build this manuscript that became this video. Anyway, this is Hakam Yara ben-Emmett signing out for this video. Hope you enjoyed. I hope you found it beneficial. Shalom Aleichem. Take care and God bless you.